What exactly is going on in the Caribbean Sea? Donald Trump says it's war on the drug cartels. But is it a play at regime change?
We'll show you the military assets deployed and our best assessment of where they are, along with some potential US military courses of action.
Stay with us as we break it all down. This is the Security Brief. Mikey, the US administration does not see Nicolas Maduro as the legitimate leader of Venezuela. They blame him for the number of migrants and the drugs coming across the southern border. So what is the intent?
Well, let's go back to where this all began in terms of the kinetic strikes, the airstrikes. September the 2nd was the first strike on a narco boat. The US are calling them narco terrorists. And Trump posted this on social media, quote, US military forces conducted a kinetic strike against positively identified Tren de Agua narco-terrorists. Tren de Agua is a designated foreign terrorist organization operating under the control of Nicolas Maduro, responsible for mass murder, drug trafficking, and sex trafficking. That's an allegation, by the way, that Maduro denies.
How many since?
Well, if we take a look at the map, 20 of these strikes that we know of, according to the latest figures, we have up to and including from the 19th of November, and more than 80 people killed, Christian, in these strikes. And you'll be able to see on the map how widely dispersed these airstrikes are, albeit the majority are. If you look onto the map there, you can just see the majority are off the middle of the north coast of Venezuela.
And just so we're clear, where is the delineation on that map between international waters and the Venezuelan territorial waters?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because when you do look on the map, you can see that a lot of those strikes are very, very close to the coast. Territorial waters are aligned to the same boundaries as sovereign airspace. So they both start at the coast and they both finish at 12 nautical miles off the coast. These airstrikes are happening very, very close to territorial waters, but not inside Venezuelan territorial waters.
OK, we should talk about what the White House has deployed.
Yeah, it's the biggest deployment in terms of the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier, which arrived in the Caribbean earlier this month. Let's take a look at what its capability is, because it is astronomical. It's the largest carrier in the world, displacing around 100,000 tons of water, fully laden. It's got the capability to hold more than 4,000 personnel on board and 25 decks. Now, that's decks going from the very depths of the aircraft all the way up to the deck and onwards from the where the air operations are conducted. It's got a speed of around 30 knots, and amazingly, it costs them $8 million a day to run. So it can operate up to around 90 aircraft, which equates to around 220 airstrikes per day. That's significant, and it can operate for 20 years without refueling. So in short, it's like parking a small country in your backyard.
And it's been redeployed. This is the point. It was on operations elsewhere.
Yes, it was. The Ford carrier has been operating on training operations with NATO in the North Sea and also in the Mediterranean. So it was redeployed from those NATO training operations back to the Caribbean.
And when you look at the map globally, where are the other US battle groups? And does this focus on the Caribbean change the US posture?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because the US has priorities, and we know from the way that Sec Hegseth and the Trump administration have been posturing, a lot of that priority is based on the Taiwan threat from China. So let's just take a look and we can see where some of the strike groups are based at the moment. Now, when we say strike groups, you've got a carrier, and then you've got that whole armada that goes with them. That's called a CSG, a carrier strike group. You've got the George Washington, and then you've got the Nimitz carrier strike group near the Philippines. But then if you come over back to the west, you've got the USS Theodore Roosevelt. Now, that went underway from San Diego recently. We don't actually know where that is going, but if you look at the Ford, the Gerald Ford, which is the carrier strike group in the Caribbean, it is quite possible that they could also deploy the Theodore Roosevelt south through the Panama Canal and into the Caribbean to assist on any operations.
All right, we'll keep tracking that and we'll see. Let's go back to the Gerald Ford. You said it was capable, I think, of 220 strikes a day. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, I mean, 220 airstrikes a day is pretty significant, and it's got a whole plethora of fixed-wing aviation that contributes towards that. Let's start with the Super Hornet The Super Hornet is the ubiquitous aircraft that is dual role, so it's capable of air-to-air operations. So they deploy these on what's called combat air patrol. So they'd sit and they do racetracks in the sky. You've got the E-18 Growler. So that's the same aircraft, the F-18, but that is specifically for jamming and electronic warfare operations. You've got the Hawkeye, which is for airborne early warning. You've got the M60 Seahawk, which is predominantly for search and rescue operations. And then you've got the Greyhound, which is for logistics resupply and personnel resupply, basically to get logistics and supplies on the boat, also personnel on and off.
So a lot of things in the air. And this weekend, the US posted a NOTAM over Venezuela. What is a NOTAM?
Yeah, NOTAM in aviation terms, we used to use this all the time when I was flying, is what's called a notice to airmen. Basically, before you're doing or as you're doing your flight planning, it informs you of either temporary changes in airspace or permanent hazards in the airspace system. That could be things like parachuting or high construction cranes if you're in the low-level system, or in this case, military operations.
Okay, so that is new as of this weekend. Why now?
Well, the simple reason is you've got the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, which regulates all aspects of civil aviation. It's saying that there is what's called increased jamming in the airspace. So part of that NOTAM will be due to American activity. So when Americans are getting airborne, you know, we've seen all the strike assets off the carrier, for example. Unlikely their transponders will be on, and the transponders allow ground radar systems to be able to see where certain aircraft are. And if they're turned off, if you've got any civilian air traffic in the area, they're not going to be able to know where they are. So that's important. But the Venezuelans also will be conducting military training operations as well, probably using some jamming. So there's a lot going on inside that. Now, why that is important to civilian flights is it uses a they use global navigation satellite systems called GNSS.
Which we use for tracking.
Exactly, yeah. So that will give them their position, and then they'll use another technology on the aircraft, the civilian aircraft, called ADSB. That stands for Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. And effectively what that does is it takes that global positioning from the GNSS, and then it transmits that through the ADSB to allow aircraft who are in proximity. That will show up on their screens, but also ground radar systems, it'll also show up. So that's hugely important. So any interference with these signals affects flight tracking, potentially, and in extreme cases could actually affect the operation of the aircraft.
Okay, so we've talked about the Gerald Ford. What about the other capabilities in the region?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier is the aircraft carrier. It's called a CVN, but actually it's turned into a strike group by having other warships and maritime assets, submarines, for example, that protect its aviation operations. Let's just take a look at what I'm talking about here. So you can see from that's the actual carrier itself. It's absolutely huge. It gives a good perspective on it. And then you've got the USS Bainbridge, the USS Mahan. These are all destroyers and warships. You've got the Winston Churchill, which is a missile defense command ship. But then you've got this thing here. This is the B-52 Stratofortress. And what they've been doing is they've been launching what's called shows of force from North of America all the way down in to the Caribbean. They've also been using B-2 bombers as well, just to basically intimidate Maduro, show him that, you know, these aircraft can, with range, get into the local vicinity of Venezuela.
All that is moving south, according to the latest reports we've had, now 300 miles from Venezuela.
Yeah, so OSINT, Open Sources Intelligence, has indicated that the carrier strike group has moved around 300 nautical miles. I mean, that was accurate then, it could have changed. But for me, that is a sort of the type of distance that you're looking at that will provide maximum effectiveness from air assets that are targeted to do strike operations, but also the force protection that the carrier will require from any aggression that comes from Venezuela. And that's super important. It's like finding that balance, because the carrier is a strategic asset, and for that to be targeted in any way would be a massive, you know, shooting the Americans in themselves in the foot on that.
I mean, I get that, but that is an enormous capability to have in the region just to counter narco-terrorism.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. What it does mean is that it puts roughly around 15,000 US personnel in the region of the Caribbean, which, as you say, is massive when it comes to a supposed operation that is just...
And we're not talking about Puerto Rico, which is currently being used as a forward operating base as well.
Yeah, Puerto Rico that includes that personnel. But let's just take a look at a map, actually, because the Roosevelt Roads Naval Station, which is an old naval base recently repurposed, That lends itself to yet another pile of assets outside of the carrier strike group. Let's take a look at what we've got. We've got the F-35B jet, that's operated by the US Marine Corps. That's what's called STOVL, which is short takeoff and landing. And when you look at the size of Roosevelt Roads Naval Station and the size of the runway, that's probably why they've deployed that there. You've got the MV-22B Osprey, that's effectively a personnel carrier that has vertical takeoff and landing capabilities.
And
that's
drones.
Also operating, yeah. MQ-9 drones. And the drones are critical for ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Also critical for any special forces operations and activity. And when you see these images that we do on the news, it's very likely that those images are coming from drones that are doing what's called pattern of life and targeting direction and guidance for these strikes.
We've talked about in the news about the CIA being in operation around Venezuela. We've not really talked about special forces, but you presume they're there.
Look, I mean, with any operation like this, Christian, you will have special forces capability involved. It's not just what we call kinetic. So it's not just striking using heli assault forces. It's also about non-kinetic activity. We call it S&R and S&I, which is surveillance and reconnaissance and support and influence. And they will definitely be operating clandestine inside that environment. We've got the MV Ocean Trader ship that's lurking somewhere off the east coast of Venezuela from what we know, although it does turn off its tracking capability. That's the MV Ocean Trader there. And then operating off the back of that, you've got the MH-6 Little Bird helicopters, so you can put snipers on the side of that hanging out, and then the MH-60 Black Hawk helicopters, which will carry, 8 to 10.
So highly versatile.
Oh, massively versatile. And that's the whole thing, is keep them guessing with the versatility. In terms of unpredictability of where they're going to operate, what they're going to do, and how long they're going to do it for.
Can Venezuela even begin to compete with that?
I mean, the short answer is not even close, Christian. Which is the whole point. This is intended to intimidate not just the carrier strike groups. They will know that they're SF capability off the coast. They'll know about Puerto Rico. They'll know about these shows of force. And so it's probably intended to maybe bring him to the table. And Trump did say last week that he actually would meet Maduro.
He's hopelessly outgunned then. And that's the point, like you say. When Trump outstretches the hand and you look at everything that is deployed and he looks what he's got, it's not a fair battle.
It's basically entering negotiations.
What do they have? Come on, what do they have?
A massive position of strength. Let's look at the land capability that Venezuela has. So officially, Maduro has around 63,000 members of his land forces, so his army, although we do know that there are guerrilla forces that have been mobilized as well, and that's important. We'll come to that later. They got
Which probably speaks about how spooked he is.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing that the US wants to do is get itself bogged down into a scenario like Afghanistan or Iraq, right? So, and that will play on what Trump was saying about trying to extract himself from war zones and not create them. The Venezuelan army, they've got T-72 Russian tanks similar to the ones being used in Ukraine, some infantry fighting vehicles, and some AMX-30 tanks previously acquired from France. So I think it's really important at this point to mention that there is a Russian training operation inside Venezuela. It's called the Equator Task Force. And there's a Russian general out there at the moment who's overseeing all of that. And that's around...
On the ground, boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground.
Not something you want to hit.
No, around 120 Russian troops, all in sort of a training and mentoring capability. And that is something that will definitely play on the targeting set when the US is building that up.
And when you look at the air capability, again, big Russian influence.
Yeah, some significant Russian influence actually in the Air Force's side. So you've got Sukhoi Su-30 Mark II Russian jets, some US-made F-16s, although the US has turned off spares and parts of that. So they've obviously got a limited life in terms of its use. Now the Sukhoi 30s, they can carry what's called the KH-31 anti-shipping missile. The US will be really interested in that in terms of any sort of strikes or any pre-strikes that might ameliorate the threat of that capability. And then there's air defenses. The Venezuelans operate the S-300 anti-aircraft, anti-cruise missile capability.
Naval assets?
Yeah, not many. You're literally looking at a single frigate and a submarine, and it's just one submarine. It's a German U-boat class. So pretty insignificant and nothing really that the US will be worried about.
It's another focus on just how much influence Russia and to some extent China have inside the country. And they will have a response to this, but also allies have a response to it. we've heard reporting in the last week or so that the UK, which did supply intelligence to the US Coast Guard in that region, has suspended supplying intelligence.
It has, and that, that's significant when you talk about the legacy and the history of the Five Eyes community. The UK has been sharing intelligence with the US on many different fronts for many decades, and this was a big move by the UK government to suspend that intelligence feed, and because of the territories that the UK has out in the Caribbean, there are intelligence assets there that'll be sucking up all this intelligence on where narco activity is. The UK used to give that to what's called the Joint Interagency Task Force, that's based in Florida, and they've cut that off. And I think it's also important to say that in US Congress, and even among some Republicans, there are concerns about the entire legal basis for all of this.
It's a good place to bring in Evan Ellis. He's a Latin America research professor. He's based at US Army War College, formerly advised the US State Department on Venezuela in Trump's first term. Evan, it's really good to have you on the programme. Thanks for being with us. Do you think there's any truth to the White House allegations that these narco groups are answerable to Nicolas Maduro?
Well, certainly for quite a number of years, going all the way back to Hugo Chavez, Cartel de las Solas has really been a term for a franchise criminal operation in which a lot of different things, everything from cocaine to illegal mining to extortion, passed up through the military leadership and ultimately through Maduro. So to some degree, it is guided from the top, although it's certainly not the type of hierarchical organization that you would think of when you think of a traditional cartel or terrorist organization.
Evan, it's great to see you, and I know you probably found a quiet space in the airport because we managed to capture you in transit. I've operated across many combat zones in the past, specifically with special forces on targeted operations. But is the US not on thin ice here if these boats do not represent a clear and present danger in terms of the rules of engagement? Where are you, or where do you sit on that?
Well, certainly I'm not a lawyer, so I can't give a legal opinion, but do acknowledge that there are there's a lot of discomfort about the legal basis of this. I can tell you that, of course, the administration, based on the designation of the cartel as a terrorist organization, has tried to assert that that gives a basis for taking lethal action against those cartel boats. But again, as you alluded to, there's a lot of discomfort among international legal scholars about that chain of reasoning.
Yeah, a lot of discomfort. I think that's a valid point. I mean, the big headline today, Evan, is that the US has newly designated the cartel de los Soles as a FTO, a foreign terrorist organization. Do you think that is to circumnavigate the US Congress in terms of its ability to get involved with any authority on this?
It seems to be to provide some additional legal authorities. It's important to remember that on July 25th, the U.S. Treasury Department also designated it as a special designated national that one could not do business with as a foreign terrorist organization. And so this really is a different designation under now through the U.S. State Department under the Immigration Naturalization Act. And so it appears that the administration was looking for some additional legal authorities which could form additional basis, especially if one were thinking about either attacks against land targets in Venezuela or going after certain assets within the United States tied to the leadership of people such as Maduro or Gustavo Cabello or others.
And just very quickly, Evan, do you think that will link to the authorization for the use of military force, that umbrella since 2001 that every US president has used to conduct military activity without going to Congress?
Well, certainly the administration seems intent on doing whatever action without looking for a formal War Powers Act approval. But there was some indication that there's an intention to at least consult with Congress. It's not clear whether that's been done or not, but certainly with the Ford carrier battle group in the region, in addition to the other assets, the amphibious ready group, the 22nd MU, the F-35s and others, it would appear that there's more than enough assets to initiate a new phase of operations, which could include attacks on land targets in Venezuela.
Evan, you were advising the administration in the first term. What do you think has changed? Why are they now instigating these strikes in the second term, and why didn't they do it in the first term?
Well, I think you have a number of different things happening all at once. Number one, the group of people advising President Trump at the National Security Council, at the State Department is very different. I think President Trump also, having lived the frustration of the inability to get Maduro out during the first time through trying to restore democracy with Juan Guaido, is pursuing a different tactic. I think, again, there's a new level of determination and new liberty to act. And I think there's also a deepened recognition of the degree to which Venezuelan Maduro, as well as other drug groups and terrorist groups, do form a threat, and particularly a threat not only to the United States through hosting groups such as the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians and Hezbollah, but also through the sending of drugs and also migration, which directly impact President Trump's political base.
Evan, I know you're a busy man in transit, so we're really grateful for you joining us on the programme. Thank you very much indeed for that, Evan Ellis there. Just to finish, Mikey, I mean, one thing we've not mentioned, which Venezuela does have in abundance, is oil.
Yeah, maybe the elephant in the room. Oil and mineral reserves. They're sitting on the world's largest proven reserves of not just oil, but coal. And huge reserves of gold, iron ore, diamonds, uranium. And the most precious metal of all at the moment is called coltan, from which you get tantalum. Now that is used in weapons and electronics and is processed from refined coltan. It's kind of like the modern day El Dorado, if you like.
Yeah, precious metals are very much a focus for the administration, not just in Venezuela. All right, give me your best guess. We talk in terms of COAs on this programme, courses of action. What do you think the intent is? Because as I said at the top, I mean, this looks a lot of expensive kit just to target drug cartels.
Yeah, $8 million a day to operate a carrier isn't insignificant, is it? Look, from a military operation perspective, I used to work in Afghanistan on strategic campaign planning. The generals will be working on the entire spectrum of what are called likely courses of action or courses of action. That's their job, Christian. Their job is to prepare for anything and everything. And if you're Maduro, that's how it's intended to look, right? You want to keep him guessing. So in the military, we designate what's called a most likely COA, ML COA. In this instance, probably airstrikes, I'd say. And if there's a graduated and proportionate response on that, it will probably be likely targeting, as it's already doing, narco vessels. But also that could lead into what's called OCA, which is called offensive counter-air. That will be potentially those F-18s off the carrier targeting Venezuelan jets on the ground before they get even airborne. And then you've got the most dangerous COA is what we call it. And that's likely to be, in my assessments, putting boots on the ground and then the potential for the US to be pulled into, what is a long sort of guerrilla asymmetric warfare. And we know from Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, and like you touched on at the top, Trump will know that as well. I mean, someone who campaigned on America first, he doesn't want to get dragged into another battle. No,
he absolutely doesn't. And that's what he's campaigned on, is actually extracting the US from those battles. So I think that will be definitely playing on the administration's mind. Anything that they will do will be with a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. It will be incisive, and I think it will be effective and quick to sort of focus Maduro's mind in bringing him to the table.
Mikey, thank you very much indeed for that. We'll keep tracking events off the coast of Venezuela. Just remember that if you missed this episode or you want to look back at previous episodes of Security Brief, it is all there on the BBC YouTube website. We'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching.